Hello friends! Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now let's begin. Moving back to Wisconsin after the wreckage of my marriage wasn't the kind of plot twist anyone prepares for. But that's exactly where life dropped me. Right back in the state, I spent my 20s trying to escape. I moved into a small one-bedroom above a bakery in Greenfield, working rotating shifts as a trauma nurse at St. Mark's Medical Center. The job kept my hands busy and my mind numb, which was exactly what I wanted. The story I'm about to tell you didn't begin on some dark highway or in the middle of a storm. It began at 10 in the morning on a perfectly ordinary Thursday, while I was folding scrubs in my cramped apartment. My phone buzzed with a number from Russ County, a place where my family hadn't lived in decades. A man introduced himself as Alden Pierce, an attorney handling the estate of a relative I barely knew existed, my mother's cousin, Martha Ellerby, a name I'd seen only once, on the back of a faded Polaroid buried in one of my mom's boxes after she died of ovarian cancer. In the picture, Martha stood beside a battered grain silo, a winter sky behind her looking half frozen and half feral. Mom never spoke about her, never visited, never wrote. But according to the attorney, Martha had died 3 weeks earlier and left everything she owned to me. Everything, which included a 32-acre dairy farm on an isolated back road outside the town of Cold Valley. Cold Valley. The name alone felt like a warning. I didn't want the property, not the land, not the buildings, not the baggage. But something in Alden's voice, some tension he tried to hide, made curiosity override common sense. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was guilt, maybe it was the strange loneliness that settles into your bones after a marriage falls apart. Whatever the reason. 3 days later, after finishing a grueling 14-hour hospital shift, I drove north. Cold Valley wasn't a town so much as a scattering of houses stitched into the countryside by miles of cracked asphalt. The deeper I drove, the worse the road became. Quarter-mile stretches of potholes filled with last night's rain. My GPS kept losing signal, recalculating, then insisting the place didn't exist at all. By the time I reached the long gravel drive, the October air had turned sharp, the sky a washed-out gray. Trees leaned over the entrance, like they'd grown specifically to hide it. The driveway felt endless. Dead corn stalks rustled on both sides like dry bones. When the trees finally opened, I saw the farmhouse. 2 stories. White paint peeling off like sunburnt skin. The windows boarded except for one, an upstairs pane left uncovered, black as an empty socket. A long metal barn sat behind it, rust creeping along the roof like a spreading infection. The silos were cracked. The cattle sheds slumped inward as if they'd been punched. But the most unsettling part, the entire farm looked abandoned for a decade, except one building, a low rectangular structure near the rear of the property. Its siding, newer, locks polished, fresh tire tracks leading to the main door. I stepped out of my car, and the smell hit me. Old manure, wet wood, and something else. Something metallic and chemical, like hospital disinfectant mixed with gasoline. My nursing instincts prickled. The attorney had given me a ring of keys. The 4th key fit the padlock on the door of that newer building, the place that looked the most out of place on the entire property. When the padlock popped open, a fresh smell of bleach drifted out. Inside was a dim hallway lined with vents, industrial vents, the kind used for cooling large spaces quickly. The lights were off, but daylight seeped in through a small vent window near the roof. I moved slowly, flashlight in hand. The hallway led to a wide main room. What I saw stopped me cold. Concrete floors scraped smooth, long metal tables bolted into the ground, drainage channels running beneath each one. These weren't farm tools, these weren't dairy operations. This setup resembled something between a meat processing room and a covert medical facility. I told myself maybe they'd used it for deer or livestock processing. Farms did that sometimes. But then I saw something that dissolved that hope instantly. Fresh water pooled in the drains. Not old water, fresh, hours old at most. And tangled in the metal grate were strands of human hair. My stomach twisted hard. I knelt, gloves from my purse already on instinctively, and lifted a few loose strands. Some long, some short. Different colors, different textures. Something had been washed down here recently. I stood quickly, heart pounding, scanning the tables. Some had dents, some had long scratches, as if something or someone had been restrained. I should have left, but something pulled me deeper. The same terrible curiosity that drags people toward tragedies they know they shouldn't see. The farmhouse itself had windows boarded from the outside, but the side cellar door opened easily, hinges oiled recently. Inside, the basement smelled of mildew and old grain. Boxes rotted in stacks. Tools lay scattered like someone had been in a hurry. Only one area was clean. A small room with a single desk lamp still plugged in. This was Martha's office. Notebooks lined the shelves, cheap spiral-bound ones, each labeled with dates going back 4 years. The newest notebook lay open on the desk. Her handwriting marched across the page in tight, frantic loops. I read the first line. "They've come back. Same trucks, same people." My blood chilled. I flipped back through older entries. At first, she wrote about trespassers, kids leaving trash in the barn, hunters using her back acreage. Then her tone shifted. She heard engines at 2 a.m., lights in the sheds, voices near the milking parlor. She called the sheriff. Often. They eventually stopped taking her calls. By the second year, her entries became more structured, like incident reports, dates, times, vehicle descriptions, number of people, what they carried, where they went. In one entry she wrote, "They're not using my barns for animals. They're using them for something else, something cold." I flipped to the last notebook. The entries became erratic, rushed. The final page made my pulse throb in my ears. I confronted them last night. They know I've been documenting. They left a bracelet, my name already printed, State Hospital. They're going to remove me. But Martha wasn't crazy, not one bit, because she'd stapled photographs to the pages, blurry, grainy prints from an old camera, vans with no plates, trucks backed up to the processing building, men in white suits carrying long insulated coolers, organ transport coolers. My knees weak, I sank onto the old metal stool. This wasn't trespassing, this wasn't hunting. This was a running operation, a quiet, organized, clinical one. And Martha had died in a psychiatric ward 3 months after that last entry, committed under delusional paranoia. I stared at her handwriting, the last words shaking across the page. "If someone finds this, please believe me." That's when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of diesel engines moving slowly up the gravel drive. 2 of them. My breath caught. I killed my flashlight immediately. Through a crack in the basement window, I saw headlights slicing through the dusk. 2 large refrigerated box trucks. Behind them, a white panel van, the same configuration from Martha's photos. 4 people climbed out of the van. White protective suits, black face shields. One carried a metal cooler with temperature locks. They walked like they had done this hundreds of times. One punched a code into a keypad beside the processing building door, a keypad I hadn't noticed earlier. The door rolled up smoothly, lights snapping on inside. Stainless steel, more equipment. Nothing that belonged on a farm. Then one of them looked toward the farmhouse, toward my car, toward the only sign of life. I ducked so fast I hit my head on the cement wall. Footsteps approached the porch above me. Slow, methodical, confident footsteps. The front door opened, the door I had locked behind me. My lungs froze. Someone walked through the house as if they'd memorized the layout years before. Their boots creaked over the living room floor. Then the hallway, then right above the basement steps. The doorknob turned, very, very slowly. I clutched Martha's notebook against my chest. A faint metallic clink echoed. The basement door began to open, and then my phone lit up in my hand, screen bright in the dark. Kayla's name, her call tone, loud as an alarm. I scrambled to silence it. Too late. The footsteps exploded into a sprint. The basement door slammed open. I bolted for the cellar window, scraping my palms on jagged glass as I squeezed through. Someone, grabbed at my jacket, but I ripped free, stumbling across the yard. I sprinted to my car, kicked gravel behind me, and tore out of the driveway. In the rearview mirror, two hazmat-suited figures stood in the driveway watching me go. Just watching. They didn't need to chase me. They knew exactly who I was now, and where I lived. 20 minutes down the highway, my phone buzzed. Unknown number, a photo, my apartment building. Taken from across the street. Taken that morning. Another photo came through. The parking lot of my hospital, my car, my license plate. A message underneath. Drive safely. My fingers went numb around the phone. They had known I was coming before I even arrived. I drove straight to the FBI field office in Milwaukee. I handed over the notebooks, the photos, the notes, everything. The agent listened, typed, nodded politely. 2 weeks later, she called me. They'd searched the farm. Everything was gone. The tables, the drains, the equipment, every modification, every trace of bleach, every track. Even the locks had been changed. It was like the entire operation had vanished overnight. She told me what they always tell people in these stories. Perhaps exhaustion and grief affected how you interpreted things. But I'm a nurse. I know the smell of disinfectant, I know human hair, I know fresh water in drains, I know the sound of diesel engines meant to hide something cold, and I know when people are lying to me. I've moved 4 times in 11 months, switched jobs twice, changed cars, changed banks, changed everything. But I still get the texts, always from different numbers. Photos of wherever I live, wherever I park, wherever I go for coffee. No threats, no words. Just reminders. Reminders that they are still here, still watching, still waiting. I live with one fear now. What happened to my cousin Martha wasn't an accident of mental illness. It was the system cleaning up a problem. And now, I'm the one holding the evidence. And like Martha wrote, someone somewhere has to believe me. I only hope that someone finds me before they do. My name's Harlan Drexler, and I've lived my whole life on the same stretch of land my grandfather carved out of the Nebraska prairie back in 1954. Folks say the prairie never forgets anything. Every boot print, every broken fence post, every whisper carried by the wind sticks around longer than it should. What I didn't know was that sometimes the land remembers things you wish it didn't. I took over the farm from my father 12 years ago after his joints finally gave up on him. He always joked that the soil took its toll on a man. Same way it eats metal, same way it eats bones. I used to laugh at that, not anymore. It was just me, my wife Marla, and our daughter Ainsley, running a little over 900 acres of corn, soy, and alfalfa, outside a town so small we didn't even have a gas station anymore. Quiet place, predictable, safe. At least it used to be. The trouble started in late May of 2019, right when the corn should have been tender and green. I remember that morning clearer than any morning since. I was checking the west pivots before the sun got too high. It rained the night before, a soft, steady spring rain that should have made everything smell clean and fresh. But when I reached the far edge of the field, the air smelled wrong. Not earthy, not wet soil, not fertilizer. Something chemical, sickly sweet, stinging, like the coolant from an overheated tractor engine. I followed the smell into a patch where the corn had turned this awful yellowish-gray color. Leaves curled inward like little fists. Stalks sagged, dead, but not the way crops normally die. Not patchy, not uneven. No, these plants died in perfect lines, straight as a ruler, a pattern no pest and no fungus could ever make. A chill ran through me so fast I had to steady myself on the fence. I called Marla on the radio. "Something's wrong out here," I said. She asked me, what kind of wrong? I didn't answer because I didn't know how. The next day, I had the county agronomist come out. A woman named Rhea Sunderson. Sharp, no-nonsense type who'd seen everything Nebraska fields could throw at a person. Except this. She knelt beside the dead rose, took one sniff, and frowned so hard her face looked carved out of old wood. "Harlan, this isn't a blight," she said. "This is chemical, strong stuff, something that shouldn't be anywhere near irrigation." My stomach twisted. "You saying somebody sprayed us?" She shook her head. "No. Too targeted, too even. This came from your water line." I laughed at first, because what else can you do when someone says something that impossible? But Rhea didn't laugh back. The next 3 days were hell. Soil samples, water samples, pivot checks, nothing lined up with any natural cause. And then on Thursday morning, more plants started dying on the opposite end of the property, using a different irrigation line entirely. 2 fields, 2 different pivots, dead in the same perfect, sinister rows. That's when they brought in a state field investigator, Morgan Datch, a gray-bearded guy who looked like he'd rather be fishing, but had seen more crop disasters than anyone should. He filled a little test strip with water from a pivot head. The strip turned bright blue. His eyes widened. "Ethylene glycol," he murmured. "Coolant, antifreeze." I felt my heart drop. "Impossible," I said. Morgan shook his head slowly. "No accident. Not this amount. Someone intentionally introduced it into your irrigation supply." The words didn't seem real. Someone had come onto my land, my family's land, and poisoned my fields. I remember just staring at Morgan, unable to speak. Rhea stood beside me, looking equal parts horrified and angry. "Who would do this to you, Harlan?" she asked. I wished I knew. The sheriff sent a deputy out later that afternoon, young guy named Cohen Markell. Good kid, but this wasn't something he'd ever trained for. He took pictures, made notes, asked me if I had cameras. I didn't. Not the kind that mattered. Farm life teaches you to trust neighbors. Out here, land is sacred. People don't trespass. But maybe I'd been living too trusting, too comfortable. Cohen shook his head. "I'd install some trail cams if I were you," he said. "Something's off." Something was more than off. Something was wrong beneath the surface. That Friday, I borrowed my cousin's drone to document the damage for insurance. The drone's camera buzzed through the sky, feeding a live view to my phone. At first, everything looked normal. Dying patches, discoloration, the ugly lines I already knew too well. But when I increased the altitude, just enough to see the full layout, I stopped breathing. The dead plants weren't random. They spelled out words, not sloppy shapes, not vague impressions. Words, clear and deliberate. Across the north field, leave. Across the west field, now. I had to sit down in the dirt. The world spun so fast I thought I might faint. A breeze rolled across the field, rustling the healthy corn, making everything feel alive and watching. I didn't call sheriff. Didn't call Marla, didn't call anyone. I drove into town and bought 10 motion-sensing trail cameras, night vision, wide angle, weather sealed, and spent the entire afternoon mounting them to posts, gates, irrigation heads, and the pump house. Marla said I was overreacting. I wished I was. Saturday passed quiet. Sunday morning at 3:11 a.m., my phone buzzed. Motion detected near the south irrigation access point. My hands shook as I opened the camera feed. A figure, dark clothes, hood up, walking with purpose, holding a metal bucket, heading straight for the connection cap, like they'd done it 100 times. No hesitation, no searching. They knew exactly where to go. I grabbed my dad's old .22 shotgun, jumped into the truck, and parked far enough to see without being seen. Through binoculars, I watched the figure crouch down, unscrew the cap, and start pouring something from the bucket. I dialed 911. But the county is huge and deputies were 20 minutes out. When headlights finally hit the road, the figure bolted, fast, and vanished into the dark line of trees east of my property. The bucket stayed behind, half filled with bright green antifreeze. Cohen arrived minutes later, sweating and rattled. "This is deliberate sabotage," he whispered. No kidding. But he also said something else. Something that made my blood run cold. "This side of your property connects to the old flood control tunnels. Those things run half the county. Most folks sealed them decades ago. Most, not all." Monday morning, after almost 2 full nights without sleep, I drove into town to confront the only people who had ever shown interest in my land, specifically in buying it cheap. A company called Sunvale Agricorp, which had bought half the abandoned farms around us in the last 5 years. They made 4 offers to me, each more insulting than the last. Their sleek office sat between the hardware store and the empty diner. Glass front, LED lights, corporate posters about community agriculture. Inside, behind the reception desk, hung a wall of employee photos. And that's when everything clicked. On the second row, third from the left, a familiar face, a familiar jawline, a familiar smirk. A man I fired 2 years earlier for stealing my fuel, siphoning chemicals, and selling scrap metal from my equipment. He knew the irrigation system better than anyone. He knew the tunnel access points. And he knew exactly how much losing one harvest would push me towards selling. My hands balled into fists. If Calder wanted me off this land, he wasn't going to stop until he got what he wanted. And that was the first moment I felt something new. Not fear, hate, cold, focused hate. I drove home from Sunvale Agricorp with my jaw clenched so hard my teeth buzzed. Calder Muncie. The man was poison even when he worked for me. Lazy, mean-spirited, always hovering just shy of trouble. I fired him after catching him draining diesel from my tractor tanks and selling parts out of my shed. But seeing his face on that corporate wall, that wasn't coincidence. That was intent. Sunvale didn't just want my land, they planned to take it. And Calder was the kind of man who did ugly work for ugly pay. When I reached home, Marla was making coffee, her hair tied back, eyes tired from nights of me waking up every hour to check the cameras. "You look like you haven't slept in a week," she said. "I haven't," I answered. She didn't push. Marla knew when my voice meant something was past explaining. I spent the rest of the day checking cameras, reviewing footage, walking the lines. Every sound felt sharper, every shadow wrong. Even the wind through the corn sounded tense, like the land itself held its breath. That night, the air felt thicker, heavy with humidity that made sweat stick to my neck. The cicadas were strangely quiet, always a bad sign out on the plains. At 2:47 a.m., my phone buzzed. Motion detected. Northeast access point. I tapped the app expecting another chemical bucket. What I saw instead made my stomach turn over. The figure from before was back. Same hood, same stride, same confidence. But this time, they weren't carrying anything. No bucket, no tool, just a flashlight gripped tight, the beam aimed downward as if searching the dirt for something small and precious. I zoomed the camera feed. The figure stopped at the irrigation cap, but instead of poisoning it, they knelt and started scraping something into a small pouch. At first, I couldn't tell what, until the camera caught it clearly. Corn roots, dead ones, collected carefully. Stolen. Why? Why take dead roots? What were they doing? When I reached for the truck keys, Marla grabbed my wrist. "Harlan, no! Suppose he's armed. This is our land," I snapped. She looked at me with the kind of fear you only see in someone who thinks the world is shifting under their feet. "Please," she whispered. "Wait for the police." And for once, I did. Cohen arrived 15 minutes later, but the figure was gone, slipped away like smoke into the corn rows. He crouched beside the access cap, shining his flashlight on the disturbed soil. "Someone was digging," he muttered. "But why roots?" I shook my head. "I have no idea." But I did. A terrible idea. Because 2 years earlier, during some heavy dredging, we found something buried near that same line, something from decades back. A rusted metal tag, a length of chain. The remnants of some old drainage mechanism, probably. But my father always acted strange about that spot afterward. Almost protective. Cohen stood up. "I'll file another report," but without a face, a name, or the guy caught red-handed. My hands are tied. His words felt useless. The land was being violated, and no one could stop it. By Wednesday, I'd had enough. I grabbed my flashlight, a pry bar, and a can of wasp spray, Nebraska's version of pepper spray, and walked out toward the old tunnel entrance near the east fence. The county installed those tunnels back in the 60s to control floodwaters, but most farmers sealed them off years ago, except one. The entrance on my land sat half hidden behind chokeweed and wild sunflowers. I crouched down, shining the beam into the dark. Cool air drifted out, far too cool for early June. That alone told me the tunnel ran deep. I pried the rusted grate upward, metal groaning like something waking from a long nap. Inside, the scent hit me. Chemical, damp, metallic, and something else, something earthy and sharp, like decomposing plants. The tunnel floor was packed with old silt, cracked like dried skin. My flashlight beam cut through the dark, revealing something that made my heart thud. Footprints, fresh ones, leading deeper in. Boot prints, a man's size, heading toward Sunvale's boundary. "Calder," I whispered. I followed them cautiously, one step, then another. Water dripped somewhere ahead. Mist clung to the roof. A faint hum echoed from far away. Machinery, maybe. After a few dozen yards, something glinted on the ground. I crouched. A zip tie, bright red, cut at the end. My throat tightened. That was the same brand Sunvale used on their chemical storage crates. As I stood, my elbow brushed the tunnel wall, and something crumbled beneath my hand. I jerked back and shined the light. The wall wasn't just soil. It was lined with old, decayed wooden beams, and something carved into them. Letters, dozens of them, scratched violently into the grain. "Get out, stop, leave this place," over and over, in shaky handwriting, some fresh, some decades old. A shiver crawled up my spine. Who carved these? And why did Calder need dead roots? The deeper I went, the stranger the smell became. Sweet, like rotting fruit left inside a hot truck, and layered beneath it. Something that smelled like antifreeze. My flashlight flickered, just once, but enough to make me freeze. Then up ahead, a clatter echoed, metal hitting concrete. followed by footsteps. Not close, not far, just somewhere in the dark. I swallowed hard, stepped backward, and whispered into the tunnel. "Who's there?" Silence. Then a single sound, a dragging, slow, scraping, as if something was being pulled along the tunnel floor. My chest tightened. This wasn't Calder. Calder wouldn't drag anything. Calder ran. Calder hid. This was something else. I took another step back, heart thundering. Then the dragging stopped. A voice, low, hoarse, nearly a whisper, echoed off the tunnel walls. "You shouldn't be here." I spun around and sprinted back toward the surface, nearly tripping over the uneven silt. The tunnel seemed to narrow behind me, as though the walls leaned in, eager to swallow me whole. When I burst into daylight, gasping, the warm air felt like salvation. I slammed the grate closed and staggered backward until I hit the dirt. Something was living in that tunnel. Something that wasn't supposed to be there. The next morning, I drove straight to Sunvale, burst through their front doors, ignoring the receptionist's startled gasp. "I want to speak to whoever supervises Calder Munsey," I demanded. She hesitated. "Sir, Mr. Munsey is currently suspended from field operations." "Suspended?" I barked. "For what?" She didn't answer. Instead, she disappeared into a back office. Moments later, a man stepped out, middle-aged, bald, polished suit, but the tired eyes of someone who lived with lies. "Mr. Drexler," he said. "I'm Denton Mara, head of field management. What seems to be the issue?" I stepped closer. "You know damned well someone damaged my crops, someone from your company, your tunnels, your equipment, your man." Mara stiffened. "I can assure you, if Mr. Munsey committed misconduct, that matter is internal." "Internal?" I laughed. "Someone is poisoning my land." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Drexler, Sunvale wants to work with the community." I stared at him. His eyes didn't show concern, didn't show guilt. They showed fear, but not fear of me. Fear of something else, something bigger. "I found someone in the tunnels," I said, leaning in. "Someone who wasn't Calder. Someone who talked." Mara's jaw tightened, and then, very quietly, he said something I didn't expect from a corporate man. "You shouldn't go near those tunnels again." "Why?" I demanded. He hesitated, looked at the receptionist, looked at the window, lowered his voice. "Because we're not the ones who built them." When he stood inside the century-old barn, something felt wrong. Not spiritually, but physically. The air in the barn wasn't just cold. It was vibrating. He walked deeper. The wooden walls were breathing. Very slow, very heavy, like something enormous pressed against the barn from outside. Inhaling, exhaling, through the cracks. He whispered, "Hello," and his breath didn't echo. It got swallowed. Every step Harlan took made the ground feel thinner, softer, like the earth itself was hollow underneath. Then he saw it. At the far end of the barn, where an old grain chute touched the floor, a seam in the wood had opened. Not a door, not a crawl space, a slit, wide enough for a man to enter sideways. The outline looked chewed, not cut. A smell poured out. Damp soil, mold, and something that shouldn't exist, like blood mixed with pine sap. Harlan raised his lantern. The flame bent toward the opening, as if air was being pulled in. Something was breathing below the farm. Harlan stepped through the slit, expecting dirt. Instead, a staircase, hand-carved, descending deep into the ground. Each step was smooth, polished, worn down by centuries of feet that had walked here. His lantern flickered. The walls were lined not with wood, but with something else. Scratched stone, symbols carved in spirals, circles that linked to other circles, all pointing downward. And then he reached the bottom. A single room, circular, enormous, too big to exist under that old barn. At the center was a pool, deep, black, still as glass. It reflected nothing. As he moved closer, Harlan felt the same vibration he felt upstairs, but stronger. The pool was breathing. In, out. Ripples formed without movement. His lantern flame leaned forward again, almost like the darkness was gently sipping its heat. Harlan crouched. He touched the surface. It wasn't water, it was skin temperature, and when he lifted his finger, something pulled back, like the pool itself, flinched. Then, a whisper rose. Not from behind him, not from the room, not from the air, but from inside. The liquid dark. "We never left." Harlan stumbled backward. The whisper continued. Hundreds of voices braided together. Men, women, children, all saying the same thing. "We never left. We never left. We never left." And then the surface broke, slowly, like someone pushing upward from beneath. A shape rose, but not one shape. Many, hands, arms, faces without features, bodies without bones, all stretching upward, pressing beneath the membrane of the pool, trying to break through, trying to be born from the dark. Harlan screamed and ran up the stairs. When he burst back into the barn, everything had changed. The lantern shattered behind him. The barn lights, never connected to power, blew on with a white burning glare. The walls bulged inward, not cracking, pulsing. Black veins moved under the wood. Harlan ran for the exit, but the door slammed shut in front of him. Not because of a ghost, because the wood grew. Planks elongated downward like living ribs, sealing the doorway shut. Every window filled with darkness. Not night, darkness. A different kind, a thicker kind. The same blackness he had seen in the pool. It spread through the barn like ink through water. And then the floorboards split open beneath him. A hand, dark as tar, shot up and grabbed his ankle. Harlan kicked, screamed, tore himself free, crawled across the floor, but more hands reached. Dozens, dragging themselves upward like roots growing in reverse. They didn't speak now. They only breathed, deep, hungry, wet. Harlan dove for the ladder that led to the loft, climbed 3 steps, 4, 5. A hand closed around his wrist. It wasn't cold, it wasn't warm, it was empty, like touching a vacuum. Harlan pulled, and in that struggle, his lantern oil spilled across the floor. A spark jumped from the broken wick. The barn erupted in flame. The hands recoiled instantly, shriveling, melting, retreating with a hiss like boiling blood. Harlan seized the moment. He kicked the last hand from his arm, climbed the ladder, smashed through the loft window with his boot, and leapt out into the freezing night. He hit the ground hard, rolling across the cold dirt. Behind him, the barn screamed. Not the wood, not the fire, but something inside it. Something ancient, something that should have stayed asleep. He ran until his lungs burned. When he finally collapsed in the open field, he looked back. The entire barn was engulfed, and in the firelight, in the swirling smoke, he saw them, silhouettes, dozens, tall, thin, limbless, faceless, watching him, not moving, just watching. The fire didn't touch them. They stood in the flames like shadows printed on glass. And then, one by one, they walked back into the burning barn, through the fire, through the collapsing wood, through the falling beams, back home, back underground, back into the dark. Harlan ends his story quietly. They weren't ghosts, and they weren't demons, and they sure as hell weren't human. Whatever lived under that barn was older than this land, older than the farm, older than me. और भाई, जब मैं वहां से भाग रहा था, उना में से एक ने सिर्फ एक चीज बोली थी, "You burned the house, but not the soil." So I sold the farm, left Nebraska, never went back. And if you ever drive past a place where the ground feels hollow, or the air feels like it's breathing, just keep driving. I used to think the cornfields around our old Nebraska farmhouse were just cornfields. Rows of silent yellow stalks bending in the wind, the same as every other farm you'd pass on those long empty county roads. But that was before the things started watching us from inside them. Before my son disappeared. Before I learned what really lived between those rows. My name is Harlan Drexler, and this is the first time I've spoken about what happened in late October, 3 years ago. When the harvest died, when the nights grew too quiet, and when something ancient woke up under our soil. I noticed it on a Thursday. The cattle weren't grazing near the western fence. That alone was odd. They always wandered there because the grass stayed greener near the irrigation channel. But that evening, every cow was pressed against the barn door, shaking like they'd heard something I hadn't. The sun was sinking, the sky bleeding that deep orange you only get in the Midwest, and a cold breeze moved through the fields like fingers dragging across the land. That's when I heard it. Not footsteps, not animals, just shifting, like a dozen bodies brushing against dry stalks deep inside the corn. I raised my flashlight and called out, "Bennett, that you out there, boy?" My son, Bennett, was 17, tall, smart kid, quiet, but always curious. He liked to wander the fields in the evenings, said it helped him think. But no voice answered me. Only the corn swayed slow and heavy like something big had moved inside it. A shape, tall, narrow, seemed to stand between the rows for half a second. Then it vanished, as if it had simply stepped backward into the shadows. A chill crawled up my spine. The cows started bawling louder. I didn't go in after it. I turned back toward the house, telling myself it was nothing more than my eyes playing tricks on me. Harvest exhaustion, maybe. I didn't believe that even then. The next morning, before the sun was fully up, I headed out with my coffee. Sawdust still in my eyes, and stopped dead in my tracks. Something had cut a perfect spiral into the corn. Not trampled, cut. Clean, precise, as if the stalks had been sliced with something sharper than any blade I owned. A spiral about 30 feet across. Perfect geometry. Right in the center of it, a single, dried-out husk, hung from a wooden post I had never placed in my life. It wasn't a scarecrow. It wasn't farm equipment. It was just a bare wooden stake, hammered deep into the soil, the husk tied with hair, human hair, long silver strands. I felt my stomach twist. I looked around for Bennett. "If this is some kind of joke, son, it ain't funny." But he wasn't anywhere on the property. Around noon, as I drove into town for supplies, I saw someone walking along the shoulder of County Road 17. It was a girl, maybe 20, barefoot, wearing a thin dress far too light for the cold. And she was walking straight out of the corn. I slowed the truck. "Ma'am, you all right? You need help?" She stopped walking but didn't look at me. Her face stayed turned toward the fields. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Don't let them see your eyes." My skin prickled. "Who? Ma'am, are you hurt?" She slowly lifted her hand and pointed at the corn. "They follow anyone who looks at them too long." I swallowed hard. "Who follows who?" This time she finally turned her face toward me. And I swear to God, her eyes were milky white, clouded like someone who had been blind for years. Except she wasn't blind. She was looking right at me, right into me. "They're awake again," she said. "Tell your boy not to wander at dusk. They take the young ones first." Before I could ask anything else, she stepped backward into the corn. and vanished. No sound, no movement, just gone. I backed the truck up until all 4 tires were on the asphalt again. My throat was tight, my hands were shaking. I didn't go into town after that. I drove straight home. Bennett didn't come home until after dark. He walked in pale, sweating, breathing hard. "Where were you?" I demanded. He didn't answer, just sat at the table, staring at the wall. "Son," he whispered. "Dad, I don't think we should stay here tonight." The air felt like it froze. "What happened?" He finally turned to me, eyes wide. "I heard voices in the corn, and someone was walking behind me. Heavy, slow, but when I turned around, nothing was there." He swallowed. "But when I didn't look, I could feel it standing right behind me." I grabbed his shoulder. "Bennett, what did you see?" His voice cracked. "They're tall, Dad. Taller than the corn. But their faces..." He shook his head violently. "No, I don't want to describe it." A thud sounded outside, then another, slow, deliberate, like someone stepping onto our porch. Bennett flinched. We both stared at the door. 3 knocks. Not frantic, not polite, just patient, like whoever it was knew we were afraid. I didn't open it. I put my hand over Bennett's mouth and whispered, "Don't make a sound." From the other side of the door, a voice whispered back. A man's voice, deep, breathing too slow. "Ha-lan." My blood turned to ice. No one in this county says my name like that. No one knew what we saw. No one should have known anything. After a minute of silence, I looked out the window. At first I saw nothing but our empty yard, the shadows of the barn, the moonlight on the tractor. But then, a silhouette stood at the edge of the corn. Tall, wrong, like its limbs were just a little too long, its head tilted too far to one side. And the worst part, it didn't move, not when the wind blew, not when the grass swayed. It stood perfectly still, watching us, waiting. Bennett whispered, "Dad, what is that?" I didn't answer, because I didn't know. But deep inside, I felt like it knew us. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every few minutes I'd glance out the window and see that same silhouette standing at the edge of the corn. Not moving, not leaning, not shifting. Just watching, like it had all the time in the world. Bennett slept fitfully on the couch, twitching every time the wind shook the porch. Around 3 a.m., he sat straight up, gasping. "Dad, did you hear that?" I hadn't heard anything except the old wooden beams adjusting to the night cold. "What did you hear?" He swallowed hard. "Someone whispered my name from the window." I scanned the yard again. The figure was gone, but the corn, the tops of the stalks rippled in a slow, unnatural wave, like something was weaving between the rows, dragging a long body through them. At sunrise, I stepped outside with a shotgun in hand. There were footprints in the dirt, but not human. They were long, too long. Each print shaped like a stretched oval. 3 deep indentations where toes should have been. And the spacing, whatever made them, had a stride twice the length of a grown man's. They circled the house, stopped under each window, even Bennett's. My throat dried. Something had been right there, inches from where he slept. We sat at the kitchen table. He looked exhausted, dark shadows under his eyes. "Dad, I didn't tell you everything last night." I felt my stomach twist. "Say it." He hesitated, then spoke. When I was walking through the field, the corn went quiet, completely quiet. No wind, no crickets, nothing. He stared at his hands. And I saw something tall move between the rows. At first I thought it was a deer, but it stood upright, straight, like a person. His voice cracked. But its arms were hanging down to its knees. I froze. And its face, He shook his head violently. I never saw the whole face, just the shape of it. Like it wasn't finished, like someone tried to stretch skin over a skull that wasn't the right shape. He hugged himself. It whispered something, Dad, when I tried to run. My breath hitched. What? He swallowed hard. Stay after dark. Cold fear washed through me. I drove Bennett into town around noon. I needed answers, something, anything that explained the girl on the road, the spiral in my field, the thing outside our house. As we entered Maddie's diner, heads turned. People always look up when a farmer walks in with a worried face. It usually means a storm's coming or livestock died. But this time it was different. People whispered. Maddie, the owner, stepped closer. Harlan, you look like you've seen a ghost. Maybe I have. I told her nothing, not until she told me something first. She sighed and leaned over the counter. You remember the old Barrow farm, before it burned down? I nodded. 30 years ago, the Barrow family vanished without a trace. Only their house remained. Charred, hollow, wrong. Maddie lowered her voice. They said the same thing happened before they disappeared. My blood ran cold. What thing? She looked around as if the walls might hear. Spirals in the corn. People showing up on the road, pale as ghosts. Strange footprints around the house. She swallowed. And those tall things in the fields. Bennett stiffened beside me. What were they? He asked. Her voice went dead calm. The Barrows called them the Standers, because they didn't chase you. They just stood there and watched. The diner felt colder. What happened to the Barrows? I asked. Maddie looked us both in the eyes. They disappeared on a moonless night. Folks said the corn swallowed them whole. Bennett grabbed my sleeve. Dad, we need to leave. I didn't argue. We headed straight for the truck, but when we stepped outside, a figure stood across the street. Tall, thin, its arms hung low, swaying slightly, and even from that distance, I could tell it had no face, just a smooth expanse of stretched skin where eyes and mouth should have been. Pedestrians walked past without noticing, like they couldn't see it at all. Only us. I grabbed Bennett and shoved him into the truck. The figure slowly lifted its arm and pointed at him. I floored the accelerator. We got home before dusk, packed bags, shoved clothes, tools, and documents into the truck. We're leaving tonight, I said. No arguing. The sun was sinking behind the silos. The shadows of the corn grew longer, darker, stretching across the ground like arms. But then, the whispering started. Not human whispering. This was layered, like a dozen voices speaking at once, all low, all wrong. Bennett grabbed my arm. Dad, they're in the field. I looked toward the corn and saw them. Dozens of tall shapes standing between the rows, perfectly still, perfectly straight. Their long arms brushed the tops of the stalks. Their heads tilted toward us in unison. A chorus of whispers crawled across the field. Stay. After. Diark. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. The lights in the house flickered, went out all at once. The wind died. The night went silent. Too silent. I heard the front porch creak, slowly. One footstep, then another. Something was walking toward the front door. Bennett whispered, trembling. Dad, they're leaving the corn. I gripped the shotgun even though I already knew. Bullets weren't going to matter. The night wrapped itself around our farmhouse like a shroud. The darkness outside wasn't just absence of light. It pushed in, pressing against the windows, the walls, even the floorboards beneath my boots. I could hear the whispers again. Layered, impossible to locate, coming from every direction at once. Stay. After. Dark. Bennett clung to me, silent tears streaking his dirt-smudged face. I can't breathe. he whispered. I gritted my teeth. I tried to tell myself it was my mind breaking, but the shadows in the corn didn't lie. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. At first, they were still, like black statues planted in the field. Then one moved, slowly. First its arm, then the whole body. Its stride was unnatural, silent despite its size. Then another, and another, until all of them, a dozen, maybe 20, were advancing in perfect alignment. The stalks bent and cracked beneath their elongated limbs, but no sound reached my ears. Bennett screamed, but the sound felt swallowed by the night. One reached the edge of the porch. I shined the flashlight. The beam landed on nothing. No face. Just a smooth, featureless surface. But I could feel it staring, smelling, knowing. We barricaded the doors with whatever furniture we could shove against them. The whispers became a chorus of distorted voices, sometimes imitating people we knew. Other times, just a low, guttural hiss that crawled under the skin. The power flickered again, then went out. Complete darkness. I could hear footsteps on the roof, footsteps on the porch, and then scratching at the windows. "Dad, they're trying to get in," Bennett choked out. I swallowed hard. I knew bullets, knives, even fire wouldn't stop them. These weren't human. Not anything natural. Then I remembered the old drainage tunnel behind the barn, the one I'd sealed years ago after the irrigation sabotage incident. It wasn't completely covered. A small hatch remained, rusted, but big enough for a man to crawl through. I grabbed Bennett. "Follow me," quietly. We moved through the living room, staying low. Every shadow in the house seemed to stretch toward us, waiting. Every creak of the floor felt magnified, like it could betray us. I reached the back door. I could hear them outside, moving in the corn, swaying slightly, watching, waiting. I forced the hatch open. The rust screamed in the silence, and I prayed they hadn't heard it. Bennett crawled behind me. We squeezed through. The tunnel was wet and musty. Old roots and mud coated our clothes. I could barely see my hand in front of my face. The whispers followed, but fainter now, like the standers had been confused, searching for the last trace of us. We emerged on the far side of the field, behind the silos. The cornfield stretched endlessly between us and the house, and in the shadows I saw them. The standers were still at the edge, swaying, silent. Their faces, if you could call them that, just voids, featureless. They didn't move toward us anymore, just watched. I don't know why. Maybe they were bound to the land, or maybe we had simply evaded them this time. The next day I called the county sheriff and told them everything. No one fully believed me, until they walked the field. The rows of corn were twisted, almost carved with invisible hands. The soil compressed where the standers had moved. No footprints of anything human. We sold the farmhouse after that. My grandparents stayed with us for the rest of their lives, safe but haunted. Bennett refused to go near cornfields for months. I've tried to tell myself it was just stress, just exhaustion, just overactive imagination. But when I drive past Route 47 now at dusk, I see the corn move, just slightly, as if something tall is still standing there, watching. And sometimes when the wind dies and the night is too quiet, I swear I hear it whisper, "Stay after dark." Most folks in Hawthorne Creek knew me as the guy who stocked shelves at the town's general store, helped Mrs. Carmichael carry groceries to her rusted pickup, and occasionally fixed the squeaky screen doors for the elderly. 27 years old, and still living in my childhood bedroom. But at least I had purpose now. 6 months into volunteering for the Hawthorne Creek Fire Department, I finally felt like I belonged to something bigger than sweeping floors and wiping counters. Captain Warren Beckett had taken me under his wing from day one. The same man who used to let me sit in the engine bay as a kid and turn the knobs on the hoses, pretending I knew what I was doing. He taught me how to read smoke, how to ventilate roofs, and how to stay calm when chaos erupted around me. Saturday nights in our town, population barely cracking 2,800, were usually quiet. So when my pager buzzed at 11:38 p.m., I thought maybe someone had left a lantern unattended while camping near the Hawthorne Woods. I grabbed my turnout gear from the hall closet, inhaling that familiar mix of smoke, fabric, and sweat. My mom always complained it made the house smell like a fire truck. The dispatch voice crackled softly through the radio. Structure fire reported at the old Whitmore property on Pine Ridge Road. Responders advised to proceed with caution. The Whitmore farm had been sold 6 months ago to a couple from Boston, Nathaniel and Rowena Cross, who'd been slowly renovating the place. Nice folks, polite, always waved when they passed my truck. Still, a shiver ran down my spine. The previous owners, the Hadleys, had left abruptly last year. Rumor was they moved for a job opportunity in California, but half their belongings remained. Tables stacked in the barn, furniture untouched, a baby crib still set up in the nursery. Something about the abruptness had always unsettled me. My pickup groaned against the cold as I drove out to Pine Ridge Road. Snow dusted the edges of the fields, the skeletal remains of last fall's corn, still standing in crooked lines. The road twisted through dense pine forest before opening to the clearing where the Cross property sat. Orange flames licked the night sky, twisting the barn roof like paper. No other trucks, no flashing lights, just me. Protocol screamed to wait for backup, never go in alone. But my gut tightened. If anything could be saved from the cellar beneath that barn, it had to be now. The cellar hatch was partially obscured by stacked firewood. I pried it open. A cool, damp air rushed up, smelling faintly of mildew and something worse. Limestone steps led down into darkness. I switched on my flashlight. The beam landed on dozens of mason jars on wooden shelves, dozens of them. But they weren't filled with preserves. Inside each jar were personal items. Watches, wallets, rings, car keys still with rental tags, small trinkets that belonged to people who had come and gone through Hawthorne Creek. Stacks of Polaroids caught my eye. Faces I recognized. Newcomers to town. Every photograph marked with a red circle, dates written neatly on the back, handwriting precise and obsessive. Then I saw the corner with children's belongings. Backpacks, toys, a pair of muddy rain boots still caked with dirt, a pink bicycle helmet, stickers peeling. My stomach turned. These weren't just souvenirs. They were trophies. Footsteps echoed on the limestone steps above me. Captain Beckett appeared in the doorway, holding a red gas can, the smell sharp in the humid air. His smile was warm, the same one I remembered from training sessions, but his eyes, empty, flat, dead. "Levi, you weren't supposed to be here," he said, voice soft, too calm. The realization hit me. Everything, the fires, the disappearances, the accidental blazes, it had all been him. Captain Beckett wasn't just protecting the town. He was judging it, purging it in his own twisted vision of order. The barn groaned above us. A beam snapped, sending a shower of sparks and dust down the stairs. I grabbed the nearest milk crate of children's toys and hurled it at him. He stumbled, the gun in his hand firing once, sparks scattering off the stone wall. I ran, stumbling up the stairs and bursting out into the night. The fire illuminated his silhouette for a moment. Then he disappeared into the smoke and shadows. I drove through the night. Polaroids clutched to my chest. No stops, no looking back. The nearest FBI office in Albany, 180 miles away, became my only hope. I arrived just before dawn, exhausted, coughing smoke into the sterile air. Agent Lorna Reeves, pale when she saw the photos, immediately mobilized teams. By noon, Hawthorne Creek was crawling with federal agents, state police, and forensic crews. The cellar had revealed the full extent of Beckett's obsession. Over 20 victims, trophies meticulously cataloged, personal effects, and photographs spanning years. Beckett had fled, but the police apprehended him 3 days later, trying to cross the Canadian border. His confession, cold and detached, revealed the horrors he had enacted under the guise of safeguarding the town. Hawthorne Creek never felt the same. New families moved cautiously, wary of the shadow of the Whitmore property. I went into witness protection, given a new identity, a quiet IT job in Vermont, far from the whispers of Pine Ridge Road and the smell of smoke that haunted my dreams. But sometimes on quiet nights I think of the barn, the cellar, the jars, and the children's toys. I see the red circles in my mind's eye and wonder how many other towns have a Captain Beckett. How many others see themselves as protectors while hiding monsters in plain sight. And sometimes when the wind rustles the trees just right, I swear I hear the whispers again. We protect, we judge, we remember.